very briefly about that, and then talk about how there's a particular kind of English case in which landscape, a particular kind of rural landscape imagery, has been very powerful in reinforcing a sense of Englishness, particularly amongst a national elite, maybe less so in the general population, but certainly in terms of a national political elite. Then I would talk about the Italian case, which is really quite different from the English one, and not lesser, but just different. And then talk about two attempts that were made, one right at the time of Risorgimento in the mid-19th century, to create a sense of a kind of Italian landscape. And interestingly, it was very much in Tuscany, and under an English influence in some respects, given the English upper middle classes' obsession with Tuscany, which some of you are probably familiar with, the Chianti Shire, kind of idea. And particularly these painters, the so-called Macchiaioli painters, who were, again, many of them very active in the process of Italian unification. So Italian unification, an explicit attempt at trying to create a sort of visual imagery of the new Italy. Over a much longer period of time, and particularly during fascism in the interwar period, the city of Rome and what it signified became much more important. But this idea of a kind of Romanità as the source of Italianità, that somehow modern Italians, if you like, were standing at least on the shoulders of some ancient Romans. And that this was an attempt, again, a very explicit attempt in the case of the fascist regime, to create a kind of imagery of Italy as an empire, and so on and so forth. Well, I'm going to argue that neither of these were very successful, because in many ways local and regional identities remained much stronger in Italy than was the case in England. And we'll see there's some very specific historical reasons for this. This has got nothing to do with, oh, isn't it sad that Italy didn't get some kind of national landscape imagery like the English did. That's not the point at all. The point here is to suggest why it ended up with something that was really quite different from the English case. And that's what we'll deal with at the end. So here the idea is to make comparisons, but not invidious ones. To make comparisons in order to understand similarities and differences in terms of the experience of using landscape as an element in the creation of national identity. That's the point today. Now, the English case is not unique. I mean, because there are other cases, particularly in Northern Europe, where there have been clear attempts at historically, and in fact creating the idea of some kind of singular national landscape ideal. In Finland, for example, in Sweden, even to a degree in Switzerland, you can find this as well. And the idea is that you've got distinctive national pasts that somehow can be conjured up both for natives and for foreigners as well by these landscape images. These are, if you like, what can be called representative landscapes, that somehow this landscape encapsulates in some way something about that particular national experience. And they can be thought of as one way, I don't mean to suggest the only way at all, but as one way in which the social history and distinctiveness of a group of people is objectified in some way. It's turned into something through reference, however idealized it is, to the physical settings of the everyday lives of the people from whom you are descended. Okay, so it's located in the past, but it's this reference to some kind of collective experience. And many of these come from particular localities, there's no doubt about that. They don't represent the entire span of a particular country, and I'll talk about the English one in a minute, because it's very much a model from the south of England. It's not from doesn't cover much of the country at all. But it became particularly powerful through artistic representations in the 18th and 19th centuries. And these have become overwhelmingly important in the images, often, particularly that foreigners as well as natives have of what England is somehow like. And I think that's very important. And so the idea is here that every state, in a sense, aspires to have its population identified with it. There's no doubt about that. But often people go in their own different directions. So that often, as we'll see with the Italian case, local and regional identifications have often been much stronger for very particular reasons, historical reasons, than was the case with the English. So let's think a little bit about some of these English models, if you like. We can call them that. We'll come back to that one in a minute. This is a painting, a very famous painting by John Constable. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a fairly prolific painter of rural landscapes, mainly of landscapes in the south of England, in sort of East Anglia, that's the area kind of north of London, and then some others to the southwest of London as well. A very famous painting of Salisbury Cathedral. And the idea is to celebrate a certain kind of bucolic, if you know the word bucolic, and sort of Arcadian imagery of a past, simpler time, where everything was, somehow, where daily life was simpler, governed by the seasons and by the rise of the sun in the morning and the sunset in the evening and so on. And where also everyone knew their place too. This is an important part of it. Place not just in the geographical sense, but in the sociological sense. Okay, where social hierarchies were in a sense natural. Everyone knew who was in charge around here, kind of thing. And it wasn't the guy with the horse and cart here. Okay, he's just part of the scenery. Okay, so this scenery then has then within it there's a political order in it. It's not just a kind of guy out painting a landscape. I mean, implicit in it is an imagery of a certain kind of social and political order as well. And this is a very famous one, the Hay Way from 1820 to 1821. Now, many, as you probably know, painters often don't just sit down and that's it. In one day, that's the painting. They often go through various versions. In fact, often out in the field, so to speak, they do sort of pen and ink or pencil type drawings, and then only later, when they go back to their studio, do they paint the thing. Particularly if they're oil painters like Constable. And this was a design again for one of his paintings, what he called Gray's Elegy Stanza 5. Gray was an English poet, and the idea here was this was in an English churchyard, a cemetery next to a church, and this again represents a kind of an overwhelmingly in all of Constable's paintings is this idea of being rooted in a particular place. And these paintings are all very much rural scenes, and again it's of permanence, of a kind of linkage from the present to the past. And in fact, even to the distant past. And here we are with Constable still sticking with the same painter, and this, of course, is Stonehenge, okay, which has been around literally, from a modern point of view, from time immemorial. So, what's more rooted than that? So, this English landscape, this English rural landscape, that's been around forever, and that we've now tagged as English. Okay, the people, the Druids, whoever it was, who used to, carry out this ceremonies at places like Stonehenge. Do you think they thought of themselves as English? No, no. Who quite knows what it was? These were, people, we're talking about thousands of years ago. But we have this ability, don't we, today, to kind of, make it seem like there's some teleology that connects them to the present. And this is where these kinds of paintings became very important. Because they represent a kind of national teleology. For the English, the Druids were English. Okay, so for Constable, he's writing about the past from which he is sprung. And the collectivity of the English are associated then with this particular landscape. And even when there's an urban past, it's always painted in terms of these remnants. This is Old Sarum, one of his later paintings, near Salisbury in the south of England. And again, there's this sense that, we're now building new cities, but they're being built, in a sense, on an urban past and on these kinds of ruins. One of the other things here is that, of course, these painters didn't just kind of spring out of nowhere, and that many of them had very clear precursors in an earlier period, particularly in the 17th century, and particularly in this case in France. And there's very much this kind of notion of landscapes here that have biblical references to them. And so here we're also connecting the present landscape back to some ancient one, biblical one, or something that has a kind of transcendental significance. And so a painter like Constable was very much in the tradition of someone painting really a transcendental landscape. What is that? Well, that's the idea that landscape has been around for time immemorial, that it's been around forever. It's not just a modern thing, it's ancient. And it represents the occupation or the occupants of a particular territory by a particular group of people for an extremely long period of time. That's the basic idea. So out of a very complex past, we get a much more simpler kind of present. One in which the whole of the past is seen as leading towards the present. And this is very, very powerful, I think, in the English case. And I think is very important in terms of understanding the peculiarities in many ways of England compared to elsewhere. Here's another one of his bucolic, Arcadian kinds of paintings. This one called Quiet Industry, The Leaping Horse. And here earlier one of Constable, in which in many ways he's projecting a kind of metaphysical landscape, a kind of sense of what a landscape should be like onto the physical one, because the actual physical one doesn't really look exactly like this. This is looking towards Salisbury. Okay, and this is back to 5. You'll see that there's quite an interesting comparison to be made between 5 and this one. So in many ways he's also following certain conventions that painters have already previously adopted. But there are the beginnings too in the Constable of a recognition of something else, which I think is very important to understanding the English case and why it's not sui generis, why it's not a good guide for almost anywhere else, certainly in Europe or in other part of the world. This is happening at precisely the time, Constable's painting at precisely the time when the country that he's living in is going through the most dramatic social, political, and economic change over the shortest period of time, perhaps of anywhere on the history of the face of the earth, maybe until recent China, maybe is the only useful comparison. Between 1750 and 1850, England went from being essentially a rural, agricultural economy to being an industrial, urbanized economy, where the bulk of the population went from living in the countryside to living in cities. Literally over one generation. We're talking about an incredible shift, an incredible change. And so here's Constable at least making a gesture towards this. This is a canal. I mean, one of the first ways of moving stuff around in the early part of the Industrial Revolution was by canal, not by railways, only came later. And this is a scene on a navigable river, really a canalized river, a river that's been turned into a canal, and how the barges and so on get towed by horses along the side here. So Constable himself is, hinting at one of the things that in fact is responsible for this sort of imagery that grows up incredibly during this period of time. Remember, Constable, he's like the tip of an iceberg. He's the best known of a huge number of people who are painting this kind of these rural scenes during this period of time. And it's precisely the time when England is being transformed. And so what they're creating is a kind of imagery of a world that's being lost. Not of the actual world in which they're living. And that's why one could use the word nostalgia. It's a nostalgia for a world that's disappearing. But it's one that gains a very powerful hold over the imagination particularly of the English political elite. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons is because this process of industrialization in Britain is incredibly disruptive of the population. People don't just move to the closest town. You essentially get the whole population being stirred up. Vast numbers of people moving to London from the north of England and the southwest of England. People going to live in literally brand new cities in the north of England and the English Midlands. And people's connections or ties to the countryside are broken very, very quickly in England. This is something very hard, I think, often for people from Italy or from France or from some other European countries to grasp, is how quickly this transformation took place in England. And so people were looking for in a sense, looking for something that anchored them or tied them to a past that was somehow more fixed and more permanent than what seemed to be the incredibly disruptive effects of the Industrial Revolution. As vast numbers of people now were and creating a new kind of social order, one that was seen as very dangerous to the existing social and political order. People now cut loose from their connections to particular places, moving to live in new ones, often living in huge, much more dense concentrations of people now switching from being really peasants to being working class. Just think of that huge sociological transition that took place during this period of time. And everyone from novelists to social theorists talked from the early 19th century onwards of all of the social changes that this brought about. Everyone from, on the one side, novelists like eventually a bit like Charles Dickens, for example, in England, or a writer, or someone like Karl Marx, who saw the Industrial Revolutions creating this kind of ferment in which the traditional social order would eventually break down, would collapse. You get the rise of a working class, and that this proletariat would in fact then create some kind of social revolution. So one reason then for the English case was the commercialization of agriculture in Britain at a very early stage, the industrialization of the country over a very short period of time, and the creation of a certain nostalgia looking back to a world that was in fact now being lost. And that was what Constable was appealing to. People who bought his paintings were investing not just in a world that was disappearing, but in a sense in an imagination of the essence of what it was to be English. That there was this kind of association, and it was this world that we came from then that was important in saying who we were, rather than now all of the social disorder, social, and the new social classes and so on that were coming into existence, which challenged this idea of having some kind of traditional collective experience in common. I think another reason why this stuff became very popular was because of the external orientation of England during this period of time. What was one of the main features of the late 18th and early 19th centuries of the British economy? Why was it that it industrialized first compared to other countries? Was it just some kind of national genius, you know?
Well, I mean, it was kind of isolated. Could that have had something? Well, isolated in the sense of.
Well, it certainly had been, but what was one of the things that grew up in the late?
The colonies.
Yeah, the colonies, the whole experience of imperialism. That there was a seat of a huge empire. And again, you had an elite, you know, people from England and from some of its surrounding, you know, the Celtic fringe, if you like, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, going off, in a sense, in service of the empire. And so this is precisely the time when India, in particular, and then later in the 19th century, of course, large parts of Africa and so on, are all incorporated into a British empire. So English merchants, industrialists, bureaucrats, people who were the civil servants of this empire. You know, we're talking about, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people went abroad, traveled widely in pursuit of their various objectives: trade, empire, incorporating new territories, and so on and so on. And this led many of them to idealize the world that they left behind. The England, what was it about how did they explain to themselves what it was that they were up to? I mean, partly, they were making money, or they were being paid, or, fine. But they also had a wider purpose, and it was to serve the empire. And they idealized the world that they left behind. In their mind's eye, if you like, it was the product of the merging of their own experience and the renderings of England that they saw in paintings and in other visual representations. This is how you learn about a larger space that you come from. You don't experience it directly yourself, do you? It's always indirect. It's always images that you saw in a book or at school, or these days, of course, on television or on the internet or whatever. And so, as they went to other places, they had this sense, in a way, or this nostalgia of developing a stable vision of where it was they came from. Something that they could, in a sense, attach themselves to. And I think this makes the English case different from that of many other European countries. This is the country, in many ways, that's experiencing globalization first, in the way that we think of it today. And so there was a much stronger identification with this kind of singular imagery, both because of the disruptions of the Industrial Revolution and because of the connection to empire. So people were, in a sense, needed to have this sense of what it was that they'd left behind. But that was where they were rooted, and that's what made them different. It was a specifically kind of Englishness that they experienced. So this is the English model of how landscape connects to national identity. And here, ruins are, of course, a very important part of this process. We've been here a long time. We've been here so long, we've managed to go all these sorts of ruins. One of the peculiar things about this English one is that it comes very much from the south of England. These are the places where people like Constable and others went and did most of their painting. So that England that's celebrated is very much that of the south of England, not the much wilder, mountainous north of England, and certainly not places like Scotland and Wales. And it's particularly these areas that are heavily wooded. That's the blacker areas on the map here. These are also the areas, if any of you remember the most famous, the first census in England was the Domesday Book of William the Conqueror, which took a census of all of the, in a sense of what he'd managed to conquer, having just arrived from Normandy in 1066. And so this is very much a map of the area that the Normans conquered initially, and it's associated with the Anglo-Saxon charters of the previous 200 or 300 years before the Normans arrived. So this was seen as the land, the best sort of land. This was the reason why the Normans had come. And so he wanted to find out, well, what did he actually have? And so these maps essentially show you the most heavily wooded areas, and then the hedges. All of the farmland was divided, even though most of the farms were very large. These were not individually owned; they were farmed in common under feudal conditions. But between all of the farms, if you like, you had this system of what were called hedges or hedgerows, which again were often heavily wooded. And it's this kind of landscape that's the one that tends to be the most celebrated, rather than that of other parts of England. And there's no mystery to this, is there? There's no mystery to why it should be the south of England. Is that mysterious to anyone in here? Where is the capital city? Where did most of the sort of ruling elite, if you like, come from? Where did most of them end up, even if they came from other parts of the country? Well, in the southeast of England. So the southeast of England is really the core area, if you like, of what was the British state in the 18th and 19th century. So it's very much that part of the country. It's not the wilds of Scotland or the north of England or so on that's celebrated here. It's a very particular image of an English landscape. It's not a British landscape. It's an English one. And that's, I think, very important. Well, the Italian case is really interesting in our pursuit of similarities and differences, because at first sight it's anything but like the English case. And in fact, Italy provides a good case for looking at the connection. Is there any real connection between landscape and identity? And at first sight, there doesn't seem to be. I mean, in the Italian case, I mean, this is just some peculiar English fixation. Maybe the English are again strange and unlike anyone else. But I don't think that this is the case at all. And in fact, there were these explicit attempts in Italy to create a sense of national identity. And I'll talk a little bit about two of them. The Roman one, much more important, perhaps, than the first one. But in many ways, the Risorgimento, the period of unification of Italy, really from the 1850s through until the 1870s, is a really interesting one from the point of view of the creation of an Italian identity. Everyone in this room probably knows that we're coming up on the 150th anniversary of the unification of Italy, and most people seem really not very interested. Is that right? What was it? The president of the region of Sicily today sort of announced that it wasn't just the Northern League who thought that Italian unification had turned out badly, but Southern Italians thought that it had turned out badly too. So it was sort of like, well, that's everyone, isn't it? You got it from both ends of the peninsula, if you like. And then a few people in Rome sort of who think that it was a good idea. But either end of the peninsula, the profound north, up against the Alps, and then apparently, at least among some people in Sicily, a sense that it didn't kind of work out the way that the people who were involved in it thought that it should. And one argument has always been that was because it was, what's the famous Massimo D'Azeglio quote after the unification of Italy? We've made Italy, now we must make the Italians. I mean, whether it was him or who knows. I mean, there are a lot of disputes about. Anyway, it's a good phrase. Anyway, whoever actually said it, and in many ways you can say that there were these various attempts. The most important, as we'll see during fascism, to actually do something about it. But nevertheless, they always found it, and we'll talk later about why they did, because regional and local landscape images in Italy have always proven much stronger than the idea of creating some kind of national one. And bear in mind the English case. Okay, bear in mind the English case. It's not a national landscape, remember? It's very much from the south of England. But it was the ability, the capacity of a ruling group, in a sense, in England to project that was important. And Italy, in that sense, and this is a point that a number of historians of Italy have made, Italy has never had that kind of compact national elite that some of these other European countries have had. To turn what was often their landscape into the national one, or what was taken as the national one, which would then be perpetuated in school textbooks and in popular songs and so on and so forth. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the particular reasons why in Italy it didn't work out this way. I mean, one of these things is of course, this is a perennial point, the late unification of Italy. I mean, compared to many other European countries, because in fact it had strong municipal, city-state, and regional state governments, particularly in the north and in the centre. But one of the things that is interesting in the Italian case is how significant visual imagery, visual representations have been in Italy. I mean, remember, Italy was at the center of the visual revolution of the Renaissance. The Renaissance started in Italy. And it was very much a visual revolution, wasn't it? It was about the importance of the visual, not just a textual. I mean, okay, it was partly about finding what the ancient Greeks or the Romans had written and so on. So there was a textual dimension to it. But one of the things was the rediscovery of the importance of the visual, particularly of visual imagery, in terms of saying something about the nature of a culture and a society as a way of communicating the meanings and significance of religious and political messages in sculpture, in painting, and so on. And so that was a very important part of the Italian, particularly of the central Italian, central and northern Italian experience in the 15th and 16th centuries. And so it certainly is not because you have a population that was not, visually acute in some way. I mean, far more so historically, certainly in terms of the elite, in terms of an educated sense of the visual than in England. So it's not that accounts for the difference. So what does? Well, there really is, I want to argue, really two major attempts at trying to create something equivalent to the English in the English landscape ideal, if you like, in Italy. And one of these, a relatively understudied and relatively unknown one, because it obviously didn't have. I mean, what we're talking about here is something that didn't take off. It didn't have much of an effect. I mean, it was intended to, but it never really did do what many of its proponents thought that it would. And these so-called Macchiaioli painters, many of them were people who were active in the Risorgimento, who fought in the battles against the Austrians, and who, in particular, and who saw their painting in a political light. These were not just guys out, painting a landscape because they thought it was pretty, or because they liked scenery or something. All of them had a kind of political orientation. I don't know whether any of you have heard of some of these painters. some of them. Telemaco Signorini, anyone ever heard of him? These are not household names anymore, are they? Giuseppe Abati, Cristiano Banti, Odoardo Borani, Adriano Ciccioni, Vincenzo Cabianca, Vito D'Ancona, no one's heard of him, Giovanni Fattori, Silvestro Lega, Raffaello Cernesi, and I mentioned Signorini himself. Well, there's actually an entire art gallery devoted to the Macchiaioli in Livorno. If you have, the odd day and desperate to go to Livorno, or you're going to a football game in Livorno, you're on that side of the political equation. You could do worse than go by, I think it's called the Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art, which doesn't seem like the right name for it, but it's absolutely stuffed with the works of these Macchiaioli painters. And in a way, I mean, Livorno, not the most appropriate place. It should really be in Florence or in Siena, as we'll see. But nevertheless, at least still in Tuscany, well, sort of, kind of on the edge of, if you like. So why mention these people? Well, because their whole idea of risorgimento, what does it mean? It means revival through unification. I mean, so it's not just about unification of Italy, is it? Risorgimento. It's about reviving something. It's about putting some new life into something as well, which have been a long-term project, hasn't it? I mean, partly. I mean, you can read even late medieval Italian poets as being interested in this. Certainly Machiavelli, was somebody who wanted to see some kind of reunification of Italy and a re-energizing of Italy, so it wouldn't always be subject to foreign rule, the French and the Holy Roman Emperors. And of course we saw the Pope as the great villain, as the person who stood in the way, and more of that in a minute. Well, these painters were very much also in that tradition, and Florence was their center. So many of these people were Tuscans or Florentines, and as I said, were all volunteers in the conflict, in the wars, to unify Italy. Now, the word Macchiaioli itself is interesting in terms of the various meanings of the word, some of which relate to the style of painting. It can be spot, sketch, or of course it also refers to a kind of vegetation, which is classical in the marema, of a kind of dense underbrush of one sort or another. And so these guys saw themselves also as subversive of traditional sort of established painting conventions, at least in Italy. And their interest in landscape, for example, was opposed to, things like still lifes or portraiture. These are important features because this was something that they were specifically interested in doing, was trying to come up with a kind of representative landscape. And they were particularly influential between 1865 and 1870. Anyone care to suggest why that was the case? 1865. What was the capital of Italy in 1865?
Florence.
Florence, yeah. So this is before Rome, okay, before the capital is moved to Rome. And so it's very much, it's like their moment, in the sun, if you like, where there's a confluence between, if you like, the Tuscans on the one hand, and then the project of Italian unification on the other. And I think that's an important part of this. And so at this moment it can appear to be a unification of the country, that the rest of the country can come around Tuscany. And what's one of the other strengths of Tuscany? Think for a minute linguistically. What also is going on? Yeah, it's standard Italian. It's standard Italian. is very much from Tuscany rather than from anywhere else. So these things all feed into one another. Like, for example, Alessandro Manzoni, the author of the famous, terribly boring book, Il Romances Sposi. How did he write that? I mean, what was it written in originally? Well, he was a Lombard, okay? Forgive him for that. So he was from, Como, or, somewhere. But he wrote it in the local Comasco, in the local dialect. He actually came and lived in Florence. And learned Tuscan in order to rewrite it. He rewrote it in standard Italian. And so Florence had this kind of, at least for a while, this kind of significance or importance. And so these Macchiaioli painters used the Renaissance forebears, the idea that they were standing on the shoulders of giants, in Florence and around about. And European contemporaries, painters like Constable, who we'll see in a minute, were also significant influences on these guys. And they expressed their nationalism through a search for images that could be used to tie the noble past, or collective past, to the developing present. This is what the landscape imagery is doing. It's saying, this is who we were and this is where we've come from. And so this ties us to this particular place. That's the point. Because we'll see in a minute, it doesn't become national, it becomes a regional identity. And that's the difference with the English case, because these guys really aren't so politically important. They're not able to impose their vision on the rest of Italy. There's no real national elite in Italy. I mean, it's very fragmented. You have the people from Torino, you have the Piedmont, the Piemontesi, who are in many ways the great agents within Italy of Italian unification, at least on the kind of political, military side. People like Cavour and so on. And of course the kings of Italy, are the kind of, recycled kings of Sardinia, of Piemonte and Sardinia. So Vittorio Emanuele, the second, who was previously and then if we go back far enough, of course, they're all Savoy, from the House of Savoy. So from a very particular part of Italy. And then we have all these Tuscan sorts of painters and intellectuals and so on. And then we have the southern landed aristocracy and so on. So you've got all these, and then you have the black aristocracy, or papal aristocracy in Rome. You've got all these people to knit together into some kind of national elite. It's not like in the English case, where you have this process where an elite emerges out of these common national projects of industrialization and empire building. So in Italy, you've got these very different, well-established, rooted regional elites. So the idea of any one of them being victorious in this process is going to be very, very difficult. And these are the kinds of things that they paint. So if you were to go to the Livorno, this one is in the collection in the Livorno, Giovanni Fattori's The Haystack, okay, which is obviously kind of generic landscape. I'm not trying to say that this is some kind of particularly, what's Tuscan about this. Some of these things, particularly Fontanese's paintings, are much more of this kind of bucolic, sheep grazing in a field kind of thing. Very redolent of Constable. And then, of course, some of these things, these are the kind of patriotic paintings. Lega did a lot of these. These are Italian soldiers accompanying Austrian prisoners, and these were popular too from that time. So here they're trying to tie themselves very clearly to the Risorgimento. And then lots of the scenes are of Florence and of the Arno. So the Arno figures prominently in many of these. And of course, this is in 1865. 1895. This is when, of course, Florence is the capital, but some of these people, like Lega, were very interested in Florence becoming the permanent capital of Italy. They bet very heavily on this. So they were disappointed when the capital moved to Rome in 1870. So I think that they would have been quite happy with the Pope holding out, and Florence becoming the capital of Italy, even if the area around Rome was sort of left out of the whole thing. Well, this never took off, as I've said, for various reasons, which we could go into. But I think that the basic thing is that these landscape impressions are very much of Tuscany, of the river Arno, the hills surrounding Florence, the sharecropping peasants, who are, like in Constable, part of the landscape themselves. These are not actors. These are not people who have any agency. They're like trees. The peasants are like trees. They're just like parts of the landscape to many of these people, which of course is part of the problem, isn't it? With Italian unification, it's entirely a top-down process, with very little in the way of any kind of mass popular connections to it. Most of the peasants, they went to bed one night and they had the same landlord the next day. I mean, it didn't make any difference to most of them, did it? I mean, that was part of the problem. And the culture of the Risorgimento that was associated with Florence and Tuscany didn't outlast it. So once the capital moved from Florence, then this kind of Tuscan, this idea that Tuscany could somehow stand in for Italy as a whole really disintegrated. Because Tuscan history was not any kind of national history, it couldn't claim to be that in any way, shape, or form, even though, of course, it could hitch its wagon to the Renaissance. And that was what these guys were hoping to do. So it was a very, very much a strategy that they had in mind here. And I think that's important. A much better known attempt is that, after World War I, and the rise, after 1922, and the arrival of fascism, in many ways fascism is a developmental dictatorship. An attempt at trying to, in fact, create in Italy some greater sense of national identity in order then to pursue some larger collective goals, which in this case was to create an Italian empire. At least by the late 1920s, that was the goal of fascism. So every speech that Mussolini started, he started by saying, Italiani! I mean, that was his, if you've ever heard any of the old radio broadcasts from Piazza Venezia, where he's, standing, like this or whatever, and that's how he starts. So the whole point is, I mean, he was a great propagandist. I mean, that was how he started out his life. I mean, he was a maximalist socialist propagandist. That was how he started out. And editor of Avanti, the Socialist Party newspaper. And so his idea was you tell a good story, and what you want is for people to believe it. That's what propaganda is about. But one of the things that increasingly became part of the fascist project was trying to recreate this sense of an Italy that was built on Roman foundations. And Roman here, not just in the sense of the capital city, but of the ancient empire, of the Roman Empire. And so this has become known amongst the scholars anyway, as the cult of Romanità, the idea of kind of Romanizing Italy, of associating modern Italy and the project of the modern Italian state with the ancient Romans, which again isn't new. I mean, if you read Machiavelli again, I mean, it's all filled with this sort of sense of wanting to recreate that particular past. Well, one of the things that obviously the so-called liberal regimes that had been the governments of Italy from 1870 down until 1922. They'd also tried to turn Rome into the city of Rome into a capital city for the Kingdom of Italy, for a united Italy. And in particular, in some of the buildings that are quite famous in central Rome, like Vittoriano, you know, that great big sort of white memorial to Vittorio Emanuele II, you know, that sort of made out of Brescian marble, which looks like, you know, aliens maybe sort of, you know, sort of deposited it, because it just doesn't fit with, you know, with any of the surrounding buildings. I mean, in terms of building materials or in terms of style or anything. I mean, it's huge imposition, right next to Piazza Venezia, right, and on the edge of the Forum. And if you look at it, it's also kind of interesting. It's about halfway on the axis between the Vatican, you know, St. Peter's Square. Where am I pointing to? I should be pointing to here. Between the Vatican over here and San Giovanni in Laterano over here. What's the symbolism here? What's the symbolism here? Sticking this huge great thing from northern Italy down in the middle of the city of Rome, more or less halfway between St. Peter's and San Giovanni in Laterano. What do those two churches signify?
It's like Italy, the north, and it's like putting the capital in the middle of the geographical territory.
Yeah, it's right in the center. But what's the symbolism of these two churches more than of the...
Two of the most important 7 churches of Rome.
Yeah, what's San Giovanni in Laterano? What is it? The seat of Rome. Well, it's the seat of the Bishop of Rome, who also happens, of course, to be the Pope. So these are the Pope's two churches. I mean, it's the Pope's church, St. Peter's, in a sense, is the seat of the Catholic Church. Okay? And San Giovanni Laterano of the Pope as the Bishop of the Diocese of Rome. So, you know, what do you do when you've got, I mean, you put the memorial right in the middle, slang bang in the middle between the two. You're challenging the Pope's authority, you know, at least his territorial authority, by in a sense saying, well, we're asserting the authority of the Kingdom of Italy over both the Pope as the universal, you know, the leader of a Catholic Church, which is the worldwide church, but which is also the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and it's his role as Bishop of Rome, which of course is the thing that licenses the Pope, in a sense, to have, you know, opinions, for example, about Italian politics or anything that's going on in the city of Rome itself. Otherwise, he's just the Pope. You know, he's kind of responsible for the doctrines of the Church and whatever, but it doesn't ground him. It doesn't sort of locate him in the place so much as this. This was absolute deliberate choice to put this huge great monument right in the middle between the two, and also right on the edge of the Forum. And what's right behind the Vittoriano is the seat of the Comune. Okay, that beautiful piazza designed by Michelangelo, you know, the one right next to the Vittoriano on the Capitoline Hill. So you've got everything covered. I mean, you've got, symbolically, you have the Pope covered, you've got the Comune covered, you've got all of these, what were historically the independent sources of power in Rome, and now, you know, we're here, okay? Italy is here, as opposed to these other different entities. The Catholic Church is global, but it's also been, until 1870, I mean, the Pope has been the ruler of a territory, hasn't he? I mean, all around Rome was the Pope's territory. It wasn't Italy.